You taking the time today to be in the presentation about understanding bullying in children. I am the program director here at Northeast Family Services for the New Hampshire Outpatient Telehealth Program. And so in terms of bullying, for me, this is kind of a passion project, as Gary had mentioned. I have, through my 24 years of experience working in the field and across different states, like this is something that universally most children will deal with at some level, or you know of someone that has dealt with bullying as a child. Either your own children may come home and have had experience being bullied at school, or they know of a friend. Um, so this is just a topic that I think is very important, especially with us having the children going back to school. This is a really important time for parents, educators, providers to be aware of some of the warning signs that children may exhibit when they are struggling with bullying. My experience with kids is that they're really struggling to want to tell that they're being bullied because, again, it's a self-esteem thing. They're trying to connect with friends. Sometimes they think, it's better to be bullied and someone talk to them than not have someone be in interacting with them. So bullying can take on a lot of different forms. And so I kind of want to talk about that today with you and just really explain some of the common characteristics of people that have been more presidents to be doing bullying, things to be looking out for with your own children or any clients and or students that you're working with, depending on your setting where you're at and work, and just professional and personal. I think, this is something that kind of transcends across a lot of different areas that we see. And the hard part of, over the last decade or two is that bullying now, it used to be it would happen at school or in an environment like a social setting. Now it's being brought into the home because of social media and phones and all the technology that, there's plus and minuses to all technology. So that is something also that I want to talk about and just how, it still doesn't make it any less, you know, difficult for kids to understand, but I think the fact that now they can come home and still have bullying occurring in the home, there's really now not a safe space for kids to be. I think it's even more important for parents and educators to really be aware of the signs and really paying attention to that. And then at the end, I will talk a little bit about some of the laws and things for bullying, cyberbullying, and things like that. And each state, has different laws and things, but a lot of them have really started to make this more of an issue, and you'll even see on, Netflix, there's that new one, that new video that came out, movie Unknown Number, the high school catfish. And again, talking about bullying and how the police, have to sometimes become involved and it can be difficult. But the bottom line is social media and anything that's out there, watch what you're putting out there because it can be found, with a court order. Police department can find, even if people are thinking they're using, secret names and things, they can still be found with a court order and subpoena. So just teaching as well children to be careful what they're putting out there because it can be perceived as bullying as well. So just a little bit about kind of the presentation. So I kind of want to start and go into that. And what I would do is, feel free to put some questions in the chat. I do want to allow some time at the end for more specific questions if that people may have. I could spend a little bit more time in answering those so we don't have to kind of be rushed to the presentation. So we can do that. And then also, if anybody have any questions about services, we do provide outpatient and telehealth services through Rhode Island, New York, New Hampshire, Massachusetts. So I'm not sure. I know we have people coming out from different states. Feel free if you want more information, I can send you a jot form and information on how to get access to services if there's someone that that could benefit from them as well. So
Kimberly,
with that, I'm good.
just for clarification, if you have questions, type it into the Q&A, not into the chat, because the
Okay.
chat is disabled.
Okay. So what is bullying? We have just overall been able to understand kind of a little bit about what bullying is.
So in terms of definition of bullying, again, it's not just verbal. A lot of times it can be written, it can be spoken, it can be even just acts and intimidation. So again, it's really looking at, bullying in a lot of different ways. It can be to harm somebody physically, their property, or it can just be to harass and intimidate, which can be scary in many different ways. So some of it can be very obvious, and sometimes it could be not so obvious. So bullying overall, though, like I said, can happen in a lot of different places for kids. So a great place to kind of figure out is, how are they on the school bus? What are they reporting? Walking to and from school, in the hallways or bathrooms during breaks, classroom changes, um, in the lunchroom, the gym locker room, in public, online, and just even at home. So these are definitely areas to kind of pay attention to what is bullying and a little bit about where it can occur, because sometimes we think, oh, at home they're safe, but Snapchat, they do Snapchat stories, they may have groups where they can be group bullying. Those different types of things can still be brought into the home. Um, Two types of bullying that can happen. Very common is the direct and indirect. So the direct is obviously occurs with the person present. So they could be at school and someone's making fun of them or making comments about something, their personal, clothing or their personality or whatever. Kids could be cruel, we've known, and they could say things, in any reason about education, about race, about their clothing, about their intelligence, all those things could be, talked about at school or in other social settings. The indirect bullying is really difficult because this is the stuff that sometimes teachers and providers and family cannot see because it's not directly communicated to the person. So they could be online, it could be social media, they could be whispering it and people are talking about it, but not directly saying it to the person. Um,
Well,
Difficult, but I think the indirect bullying can be very, very difficult because that one is harder for clinicians, for teachers, for anybody, family providers to really identify if the client doesn't report it. Now, if you're in school and a kid saying something to somebody else, the teacher may catch that, or someone else may report it because they said it loudly in a classroom. Then that's more noticeable. So these are the definitely two types to kind of be aware of. Um, Now, in terms of actual breaking down into bullying, there are four specific types that we see in terms of like physical bullying. For one, that is obviously type of, aggression where they're tripping, pushing, hitting, kicking, blocking, touching in inappropriate ways. Um, this can be also damaging to the person, both physically and psychologically. So you're seeing, this is a part that could be really frustrating because maybe they're smaller and they have a larger child that's kind of intimidating or pushing, feeling like he's more of a target or she's a target because they're smaller and maybe could be pushed around more. They may be younger in age, so there's a lot of different things that could be happening. But the physical bullying really triggers a lot of safety issues, and the child maybe have fear of safety. um, and it may impair their ability to focus on life, school. They may really struggle from this. And it may lead to some school aversion because they may be afraid if they're getting bullied on the bus physically or they're getting pushed off the bus or walking to and from school, somebody's bullying them. So this is something that, depending on where the bully's hitting them, sometimes it may be obvious and you could see marks and things like that, but other times it may be that you can't. And they could be grabbing them or pinching them, that makes it difficult. So as a provider, really looking at, can we see any of these types of bullying? Are they reporting any of that? And then what happened? Like in gym, it's really easy to kind of say, oh, I just pushed, oh, I was trying to get the basketball. I just accidentally pushed them, knowing that wasn't accidental. So just really being aware and having your child really understand like what is bullying. Verbal bullying is where they're putting down, with words, comments, teasing, demeaning remarks, name calling. It could be making racist or sexist comments or insults. This is, again, very hard to address because a lot of times kids will do it very slyly, quietly. They'll whisper it in class or say something in passing of halls where teachers can't notice. Sometimes it's through Snapchat, these group texts and things like that, where they're all kind of, going together and thinking it's funny and making these comments, or indirectly making comments on social media or on their stories, or just in general, like posts that they may post on Instagram. Most teens and kids don't use Facebook, but some do, but usually Instagram and TikTok and then Snapchat are the main ones. They do have WhatsApp where they, will talk back and forth. So there's some, but just being aware of what social media your child's on and sometimes monitoring that because they may not think that anything is really mean, but to somebody else, it could be really damaging. So again, not just kids be kids. I know some providers and, schools have said that, let's just kids be kids. They're just being kids. It's more than just kids being kids. Like words hurt, whether it's physical or verbal, they hurt. And they could have a long lasting effect on children, impacting, their kind of education, their social abilities, all those things can, create issues later for them. Social bullying, again, including, exclusion from groups. There was, sometimes, where you ask, where's the client at? Where are you having, who are you with for lunch? Well, I sit by myself. Okay, so do you have a group of friends? Well, no, but there's a group that's sitting next to me, but they're kind of making fun of me or not being being friendly and being mean. So paying attention, like, or there's certain groups that are not wanting them to be, together with them or kind of alienating them from other people, spreading rumors, talking to them, overall just in a negative way and just really avoiding them or really making it uncomfortable, that making other people not like them. So then they are more isolated. So these things can be really, really difficult, but this is a very common type of bullying that does happen. And again, this is also kind of hard to address because you can't force people to be friends with kids, each other. You want them to find you always tell, as a parent, I want you to find your peer group. I want you to find your social group that where you fit in. But for some kids, they don't find that group. They can't really find that social group to fit in. So that's the hardest part. And then cyberbullying. This one, has really become a big issue, over the last decade or two in terms of, the joys of social media. There's a lot of great, connections and things that go on with it, but there's also a large deficit that can create and really be harmful for children, and they not even realize it. So this type happens through either internet, electronic medium, social media websites, text message bullying, picture video clips. People could be sending pictures back and forth, email messaging, chat room bullying. And for cyberbullying, the biggest thing I see is that, and the sad part is I see it even for adults doing it, but where you go on social media, and I'm sure people have had different Instagram or TikTok accounts. If you go on and you look, you'll see like there's people that will just purposely go on there. We call them kind of trolls or things like that, but will purposely go on there to make negative comments for people and make them feel bad. And again, the impact of that, whether they're a child or an adult, that sticks with them and they start to believe that and think that this is true. So being really aware of the impact. And I always tell people, think twice before you type or write something or put it out there into the world, because again, it's not confidential. It's not as secure as you think it is. And again, you're not sure what other people are going through. So always be kind. So I think that is something to really, kind of instill with kids as well. So again, where does it happen? At school, on the bus. Like it could be really hard because kids cannot get off the bus. They may try to go in a different area of the bus, and then that person may come back and follow them, or they may push them off the bus or wait till they get off the bus. So that could be really hard. The passing periods. So really looking at, and these are great questions. Like as a clinician, I've asked clients to kind of see if they don't want to talk about bullying. Has anybody ever said anything to you that maybe wasn't nice, or maybe you think they were joking, but you weren't quite sure, like on the bus or when you're going to and from your lockers in the hallway, or, if you're in the lunchroom when you're sitting next to people, or recess or playground. And if you notice, these are areas, that oftentimes may not have a structured environment. Gym class is more open. The classroom, sometimes I've still had kids get bullied, but the kids were smart enough to kind of whisper. But these are at school specifically, the areas and times I'm talking about, they're less structured. There's less supervision. There's less people actually interacting with these children. There may be one or two, teachers in the lunchroom overseeing lunch. So it's a great prime opportunity for bullying to happen. So being aware of that in public places. So in the gym, like they could be working out in the gym, at a sporting event with friends or family, at a restaurant, out with friends, locally, they could be going to, practice at their school for, if they're in a play or for sports, any place that the child can interact with peers and, kids of their own age can be a really difficult time for social media bullying and just bullying in general. Um, some of the basic characteristics of bullying now, again, there's tons of research out there. There's nothing specific, so you can't say like this is textbook bullying, but there's some criteria that we do find that are common and research has shown in people that do tend to lead to bullying, that do the bullying. Again, so the biggest thing is they need to have control or dominance and dominate somebody else. So they feel like they have to be the one kind of always winning all the time and being ahead of somebody. And it's kind of the perfectionistic thing that, and for bullying, it's a way to protect themselves. So if you think about it, everybody thinks bullying are they're strong and they're not afraid of anything. On the contrary, most bullies are actually afraid of rejection, afraid of people not liking them. And so a way to protect themselves is they make people afraid of them. They make people afraid to say things negative about them, make people afraid to not do what they say. So they get this false sense of control, but in a way it protects them and it creates this wall. So then they are not going to be having the opportunity for someone to come to them and bring them down or say something negative to them because they're fragile and they want people to like them, but they do it in a way that's kind of adverse to, what we would think you would want to do. So they may be quick-tempered and impulsive, take pleasure in seeing someone, hurt or upset, or animals in distress. So again, it's just kind of like a budding personality, kind of to pay attention to, like, why is this happening? Why is someone wanting to hurt others? Looking at their history, like, is there domestic violence? Is there other things going on in the home that could be leading to this more aggression or this more hostile, interactions with other peers that maybe they're not doing anything to. They're just, normal kids going to school and yet they're being targeted. Usually these bullies refuse to take responsibility. It's, everybody else's fault. Well, I wasn't being mean. He's just being too sensitive. That's not what I meant. He's taking it out of character. That's not what I meant by that. I wasn't trying to be mean. I was just playing. I was just joking. And we were just, he knew it was a joke. We were just being, silly. So really not taking it in the light that it was meant and kind of changing it around so that it kind of diffuses the situation and just overall just the lack of empathy being insensitive to feelings of others and really looking at how does that happen, like why does one child not want to look at another child that's of their peer and be kind and be nice and be supportive and yet to look at why someone's different and kind of accentuate that and create conflict and really being dominant and more toxic for this other child, which can have a really long-term effect on them. Personality types. So again, really the people who are the greatest risk are people that are different, just in general. You know, in terms of if they're and also if they're having mental health issues, because if you look at it, children that are more fragile, so they may be depressed, they may have low self-esteem, anxiety, ADHD, they may be going through some trauma, something may have happened. They may be struggling in school or not feeling like they understand what's happening. They may be physically different. They may have a disability. They may, have different hair color or freckles or anything can make them different. And so, but what they're showing is people that have more of the mental health disorders oftentimes, draw attention to themselves because kids do notice that they're a little different in terms of ADHD. If they're a little bit more hyper and not being able to move around, they may notice that there's a paraprofessional helping that child in the classroom to focus and doing those things. So they are inherently, identified as different. So and they can't regulate their emotions. So they may be real easy trigger for a bully to say, "Oh, I'm going to go in there and get someone upset or frustrated," and then they start to cry and withdraw. So they could be very easy targets because these people may not, these kids may not go and tell a teacher. They may be completely overwhelmed. They may feel like they deserve it. They may believe that maybe they're being oversensitive. So it really, really, they struggle in terms of really a lot of times getting the services they need or advocating for themselves and be afraid to say anything because what if I say something? Is the person, the bully, going to come back and make it worse? Are they going to continue to, are they going to hit me harder? Are they going to, make me more embarrassed? I don't want to say anything. I just rather act like it's not there and just try to get through it the best I can. And then also, children sometimes that are overweight. Again, anything that makes you different makes you a target in this world, unfortunately, with kids because they notice differences and they use that as a way to kind of go in there and make it difficult. And that's something that we don't want to have children to be, isolated and kind of put in a way that they feel uncomfortable for anything, for any reason whatsoever. So just again, common characteristics of why kids can be bullied. Again, like I said, and this is really sad when you see this, but like physical appearance, any differences, race, gender, disability, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation nowadays could be really bad and very difficult for peers, if they're understanding, if they're not sure where they're falling into that, they're exploring, they're trying to identify, their self-identity, middle school, high school, like these are very difficult times, even for adults, but it's a really difficult time for them to understand, trying to identify who they are. And now people are making fun of them or for their religion or low self-esteem, poor social skills, maybe they're learning another language and they're not really great at being able to express themselves. Maybe, they're struggling. Maybe they have some delays that makes it difficult. So, and just overall low popularity, maybe they're not as popular. And so they're an easy target because now the popular kids are going to target the kid that maybe isn't as popular and make him feel bad. And who's going to say anything because they're going to side with the popular kids because they want to be in, they want to be part of that group. So just really looking at these common characteristics and just being aware, like if your child or your client has any of these issues, to really kind of pay attention and make sure that we're understanding, that they could be potentially a target. So for me as a clinician, if I know these things, I really work with the client from the very beginning in terms of intake, and asking the question. And I don't say, have you been bullied? Because they're going to shut down. They're not going to want to talk about it. It's an embarrassment. They don't want to admit that. So for me, I really look at, hey, has anybody ever been mean to you? Have they ever said anything that makes you feel uncomfortable or you just feel like, you kind of wonder if it was they were being nice or they were trying to be mean? Has that ever happened? And going through all those different areas in school throughout their day. Like for me, that is a great way to help be aware and it helps to stop bullying because at the end of the day, I don't want this to continue. And if we don't address it, the bullies continue to bully and they continue to be able to make that impact, negatively on these kids. And I tell my clients when they do admit it, I'm like, it's hard to admit that someone's doing this, but you're not the only one they're probably doing it to. So you have me and we work together. I can reach out to the school social worker, we can talk to them and we can figure out a way to make sure that this stops. And not only are you helping yourself, but you're helping other kids that this bully doesn't do that to. And for me, that is usually that mark that allows them to kind of work with me to have them kind of address and really go towards that bully and say, okay, this needs to stop because now it's not even just for them, it's for the betterment of other kids. And they don't want other kids to feel like they do. So it's really powerful in that way. Um, in terms of statistics on bullying, there's a lot of statistics out there, but for me, like I thought this was really important to kind of just give you an understanding of kind of like the prevalence of where it's at and what we're seeing. So, United States, 1 in 5 students between 12 and 18 are being bullied at school. That's pretty significant to me. I think one, just one in general. I don't like any kids being bullied because of the effects it has on them. And we'll talk about, again, it doesn't make them an increased risk of suicide, but if there's already predisposed conditions and things happening, I mean, it could increase that for them and giving them that hopelessness feeling. 160,000 teens have skipped school because of bullying. It's easier to avoid than have to deal with and confront this child that's bullying them, or maybe they're fearful and they're afraid of their safety. And nowadays, with everything happening in this world, you know, it could be more than just a push. Like some kids are bringing weapons to school. There's a lot of other things that could be happening that these children could be really scared if they're threatening, more severe things than just, I'm going to push you. It could be like, I'm going to hurt you, like seriously. And that's scary as a parent and just as a provider, really looking at these things in ways we can really evaluate and helping stop these, some of these things early on and helping the bully as well. So students reported being bullied, frequent scored lower in reading, math, and sciences than peers that were never bullied. And I'm not surprised by this because if someone is distracted, if someone is, thinking about something else, anxious, depressed, scared, kind of in a trauma response, you're not going to be able to focus. And so reading, it's very comprehensive. It's you're having to like gather information from a passage or story and then answer questions. If you're getting distracted, you can't comprehend and understand and hold in that information. Same thing with math. It builds off of each other. Same thing with science. You could be doing science experiments or how things, build up to one thing and, or doing the, periodic chart. And now you're looking at that and how does that carry over into doing, the different elements. And then you've lost it because you're afraid of the bully sitting there looking at you or making comments or laughing, those types of things. So I'm not surprised that we're seeing that that's impacting them. Again, most common type of bullying is the verbal, and then there's the social and cyberbullying. But I am starting to see, that cyberbullying percentage is going to continue to go up as, we continue to get more social media, kids as they get older, those types of things. We're starting to see more and more of that. And I'm hoping at some level they're going to start to track some of that. And, they're starting to flag things more, which I do love on social media, that they're starting to flag it if someone posts something that it may automatically get reported. So people aren't putting really, horrible, toxic comments. They're starting to get called out and their accounts can get shut down. So I like that they're starting to do some of that. It's few and far between. It's things are still getting through, but just really looking at having more of that. I think that, kind of policing websites, I think, are really important. Again, half of the bullying situation, like 57%, stop when a peer intervenes. So the power of peer involvement is key. Really looking at how we can help other students be supportive and help one another. And if you see something that's not positive, intervene and say, "Hey, Johnny, stop that. That's not nice. You're being mean. It's not funny. Stop it." And it holds more weight. So holding kids accountable for toxic and negative behavior is key. And I think having the strength as a child to be able to do that and stand up for what you think is right and kind of fight, the underdog, fight for what's right. And I think that's very powerful. So really working with your children, and I do that with my own kids, like you stand up if something's not right. As a clinician, I don't want anybody getting bullied. So please stand up, tell your teacher, tell the school, tell somebody, your social worker, anybody at the school what's happening. Sixth grade experiences the most bullying, 31%. And I know, I'm in Illinois and I see New Hampshire and Florida as well. I think a lot of that happens because most of the schools here in Illinois transition around the sixth grade. So that it's sixth, seventh, and eighth. So for me, like that is a big change. That's considered the middle school ages. So again, just a lot of hormones, just a lot of growth, just a lot of, they're starting to have more independence in between classes. They're starting to develop those more, serious peer groups and sports and things like that. So really understanding that that transition can be very hard for kids. So really looking at, I think sixth grade educators and things like that do a really good job in having bullying seminars and bringing those presentations to schools and having them, talk about that with their students, because making them aware that this is happening and it shouldn't, and that they're aware of that. 70% of the school staff have seen bullying. So again, some teachers, professors, and things like that have seen bullying happen. 62% of the school staff have witnessed it 2 or more times in the last month, and 41% have witnessed bullying at least once a week or more. But again, it's teachers and educators are overwhelmed. There's, everybody's trying to do more with less. I understand that. So sometimes they may not have the ability to be going to the social worker. The social worker may be overwhelmed. There may be 1 or 2 social workers that are responsible for 300 kids, 200 kids. Like that's a lot. There's a lot of pressure. So things do fall through the cracks. So I think it takes a village in terms of looking at the school providers, families, everybody working together as a team. I say teamwork makes the dream work. Getting the team, everybody together on the same page to be aware of it, educating everybody about it and the warning signs, and making sure we're pushing to make sure that these things are addressed. And again, not surprising, students are less likely to report bullying as they get older. So only 39% of
You know,
are notified adults of bullying. So I think that is kind of the biggest thing that you see. And I'm not surprised by that. Just in general, high schoolers don't view it as bullying. They're just playing. They're just doing this. They're doing that. But in reality, it's still bullying. And even I've said I've done bullying across the lifespan. Like you even see bullying into adulthood. We don't label it as bullying, but there are people that are still toxic and negative and saying hurtful, harmful comments. And you see it on social media. You see it at work. You see it in a lot of different environments where it can be very toxic too, and just impedes work performance and impedes school performance. It just overall can have that negative impact. So bullying and suicide, it doesn't necessarily go hand in hand. So again, like I said, research shows that, persistent bullying could lead to, isolation, rejection, despair, not wanting, kind of feeling excluded from the groups. That can really have an impact on people's mental health. Studies confirm close to 70 to 75, 77% increase in teen suicide rates over the past 10 years, and it's seen in every state in the nation. So bullying can increase depression and anxiety symptoms and can contribute to suicidal thoughts and behaviors. It's not necessarily a complete indicator. So just because someone is bullying doesn't indicate that they're going to be at a higher risk for suicide. Usually there's other predetermining issues that are happening, like a history of, trauma or depression, anxiety, other things, school refusal, issues with school. There's other things that kind of lead to that. And then the bullying is just kind of an addition to that. The vast majority of people, like I said, that are bullied do not become suicidal, but there's a chance that they could based on, their history and where they're at emotionally. People who do die of suicide have multiple risk factors. Like I said, it's usually just not one reason. Usually there's other things happening. And studies show that the LGBTQ plus youth are at an increased risk of suicide attempts, even when bullying is not a factor. And again, it's just they're trying to identify who they are, and just imagine how difficult that is in this world. People are so quick to judge and critique, and everybody has a say and everything, and if you're not following the status quo, what everybody else is doing, like, you're viewed as different, and it's not okay. Like, people need to be able to have a safe space
Kimberly, we
to.
have a question.
Yes.
Do you feel social media is making kids less sensitive?
I think social media and just some of the gaming systems, some of, like, the Fortnites and, the different war games and things like that, I think it does at some level. My biggest concern is, there's even showing like aggression and like an addiction component that are shown to some of these social media apps and some of these gaming sites as well. So there's just, there's a lot of research out there. You can look at the research on that. But I do feel like some of this does make it desensitized. You see more of it, like it's becoming more acceptable because you see other people doing it. I see adults doing it on social media in terms of
Yeah.
bullying. So, I think yes. So I really watch with children, really limiting, and doctors have it up in their doctor's office, pediatricians and things, but really it's that really paying attention to the amount of time that kids are using these devices and paying attention as a parent, what are they doing? Looking at what they're doing, look at what they're saying, their counts they're following, pay attention to these things and have an open dialogue with them about these things. And again, the more open you are about that, you're going to identify if things are happening, and also really kind of censoring because they're showing a higher risk of addiction. Like when they're doing research studies for these children that are on these gaming systems. And again, this is still a newer technology we're starting to see, but they're starting to see that when things are removed, like gaming systems are removed or social media is removed, they start to develop almost like an addiction. They become very angry. It's kind of going through withdrawal, and they're showing that these things are lighting up their brain, the front part of the brain that is, the pleasure center, kind of, where addiction can live. And so they're starting to see more long-term effects of these things on children. And again, we don't have long-term studies because, we're really looking at 10 years, a good 10, 15 years of this. So we don't have long-term studies and longevity and seeing how this is impacting our kids. But my concern is everything in moderation is the way I look at life. Everything in moderation. Social media is not all bad. Gaming is not all bad, but really looking at having limited time and really that open communication with our children is key because
Great.
that's how, we can catch things. Mhm.
Great. Thank you.
So, how to assess for bullying? So, parents, educators, providers, family, parents, teachers, everybody, like, again, it takes a village. So, really looking at, like, how can we stop bullying? What are the things we need to do? So, again, mention these topics of bullying with your children. Pay attention to how they interact with their peers when they come over their house, or if you see things on their social media accounts. And all those things are really important. Paying attention with the kids that they're hanging around with as well. Social circles can be really impactful where they're trying to be part of a group. That middle school, high school, you want to be accepted. So unfortunately, sometimes it's the group think where you just go along with what everybody else is doing because you want to be cool and you don't want to stand out and say it's wrong. Be that person that stands out. Be that person that does that. And I can tell you a story, again, as a therapist, my kids, I have this discussion with them. There was a kid at my son's school that was getting bullied, and they posted a video on social media that was a good 4 minutes long, and it was horrific. Like the things that were being said were just horrible, like really toxic, abusive about his family, about his parents, that he's not worth it, kind of just really bad threats and they were watching this in the classroom. And now my kids go to a really great school, but they were watching this in the classroom. The teacher didn't catch it. So my son, being, the child of a therapist, comes home and says, "Mom, I want you to see this." And I said, "See what?" And he shows me this. I honestly couldn't get through like a minute of it. It was horrific. It was really horrific. If this was my child, I'm like, and I don't know. I said, How is this kid managing? He's like, "Well, he kind of laughed it off, but we knew he had issues. My son knew him from school. There was a lot going on." So I said, "Okay, not acceptable." So I called the school and I said, "Here's the link." I told my son, email me the link." I emailed that to the principal and the social worker. I said, "I want this addressed." I said, "This is very toxic and it's very alarming that this is happening." And they were watching this in the classroom. It's just a lot of interference. So my son went to school. They waited for the child to get off the bus. He got off the bus. They brought him into the office. The kid got expelled, and it was closer to the end of the year. He was not welcome back to the school year. They took it serious, and I respected that. Did I want to damage this child's, career and at school? No. But I also wanted him to understand like this was serious. And I told him like this was probably one of the worst, and the school said it was one of the worst situations of bullying they've seen in like a decade. It was really horrible. And I told my son, he felt bad because he's like, I knew this kid, and he sometimes jokes around like that and it can be kind of toxic. I said, but it's not okay, because there may be a child that can't tolerate it and may hurt themselves or may self-injure or may want to become more suicidal because they can't cope with it. So, and wanting him to get help. So he got help, I said, have it mandatory that he gets some counseling and the family be aware. They didn't know what was going on. They were having issues. So, using it as a teaching situation. And I told my son, I'd rather us do this now and this child get help. And this was in fifth grade, that he get help and get some, assistance and understanding this is wrong, then he get a little bit older and this happen. And what if somebody hurts themselves? What if somebody hurts themselves because of something he does? Now it's too late and we can't help him. We can't help him see the wrong and fix it. So, that was a very serious case. But again, we can work together to make sure this happens and reach out to teachers, reach out to parents, making sure people are doing that and really push back, like with the schools. I've worked with some really great schools, and then I've had some schools that, again, some of the teachers are like, oh, they're just being kids. I'm like, no, the child's coming to my office like in tears, hysterical. Like, this is more than kids just being kids. Like, this is having a negative impact on their schooling, just on their education, their social, connections with peers. So really being aware of that. And just again, asking your child, has anybody ever made a negative comment? Like, have they ever, somebody said something that made you didn't feel good after? Like, what was it? Why do you think they said it? And address it. And, again, teachers can identify if someone's having poor attendance, poor socialization with peers, they're withdrawn, they're more isolative, refer them to the school counselor, social worker, have them just be evaluated, potentially take a look at that, reach out to the parents, like work together as a team to see if we can identify if bullying is happening. And again, they may not initially report it. Like I know as a therapist, sometimes, they've allowed me to talk about it. They right away they can talk about it. Sometimes it may take a couple sessions. But you're going to understand, like, you're going to get a feeling like something is off at school. And the more you talk about it, how they talk about peers, their body language, nonverbal. So I think that's something that, could be really important to kind of pay attention to. So questions to ask for bullying, was it an accident? Do you think like it was on purpose? Were there any marks? Where do you sit? Kind of who are being, are you sitting by yourself? What do you do if you are bullied? So just kind of talk about it. What if you were? What would you do? So having a problem, having something worked out ahead of time, to making sure that everybody's aware of what's happening. Are you having any problems at school with friends or peers? So again, just kind of being aware of that. So again, we've kind of talked about these already, but just 10 steps to prevent bullying. Be aware, pay attention. If it's a problem, recognize it, don't ignore it, doesn't go away. Take it seriously, act immediately. Again, remain calm, get both sides of the story, understand what's happening so we're not passing judgment too quickly, get the child in a safe space so they can talk alone and be honest and open with what's happening. Don't try to resolve it on the spot, really work on communicating that, making sure your school has an anti-bullying policy and be aware of it, because that's really important. And, take it up as high as you need to go. If you need to go to the Department of Education, making sure that your child's being protected. Bystanders need to be held accountable, like we said. Peers have a great pressure and, to be able to make peers, other peers stop from doing bullying. So making sure that they're just as liable and in trouble as the person bullying because they're allowing it to happen. Try to be open because again, you want the children to be open and talk about it and, seek professional help. There's, reported cyberbullying, go to your local law enforcement, especially for like the cyberbullying and things like that. Like it could be considered a felony based on how severe it is and what's happening. And just overall get trained on how to handle it, how to identify it, and just really engage in those anti-bullying, I think are really, really important. I think that is something that's really important to be aware of. And I posted this up here, just some anti-bullying resources. www.stopbullying.gov has some great resources that you can use. You can pull out handouts, information for students, social workers, school. There are laws, in state of New Hampshire, New York, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and remaining 50 states in regards to harassment, bullying, and discrimination. So be aware of them, research them, and make sure, you bring those to school and you talk to those with the teachers and things like that, that you are aware of these things if that's happening for your child. Or if you know of, incidents that are happening, be aware of them. And sometimes, if schools get overwhelmed and they may not have the resources, then you can reach out to the local police department. They can, really help investigate this if there's really serious. Tell your child to keep any type of devices, any media, anything negative, don't delete it because they get frustrated. Leave it there. Leave it there or screenshot it so then that can be presented as evidence for, police and things like that if we are going to follow through. So keep those text messages, chat messages, if it's in a story, screenshot it. Like keep all that stuff because that is just evidence that these things are happening and it helps support, having a documentation for investigations if it does need to be brought to that level. And I've had some cases that had to be that way. It had to be brought to that level. Unfortunately, that's not the way you want it to be. I would rather intervene and catch it early and work with these children to have them understand the long-term effects of bullying and to stop and find better ways. And a lot of times the bully needs services. Like I feel sorry sometimes for the bully because the bully does not have a strong support system. Usually, families not maybe aware of what's happening, so they're not even a good resource because they don't even know what's happening. So for me, those are just ways I think for us to kind of work together and really help identify bullying, be aware of it in the communities with, working with our children and providers and all these different areas where it can happen. And here's some access to resources that if you need it, research that, and it can be very helpful to engage with your, if it's a client, if your children, and just in general, if you're a provider at your school with your social workers, I think that could be helpful to identify.
Kimberly, we have another question. Where does the school's responsibility to bullying stop or end? Do they
Most
follow it
schools
home?
Yeah, most schools do have an anti-bullying policy. I know back in the day, a lot of times, pre-social media, a lot of people were told that if it happened outside of the school, it's kind of out of their jurisdiction. But
Mhm.
now, because they are students and they can track it more via, social media and other things like that, that they can now a lot of times be held liable as well. So working with the school, making sure that they're reaching out to those school social workers is really the great starting point and letting them know what's happening. How are they going to intervene? How are they going to do this? And then if not, move it up to, the dean or move it up to the principal or move it up to the Board of Education. And, if there's physical abuse happening, you could reach out to DCYF. Like you could do an investigation because the school is technically supposed to be allowing your child to be safe during that educational time at school. So you can reach out to DCYF and make that report. And then you can also work with um, just in general, all the providers at the school and law enforcement as well if need be. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do that.
Great, thank you. If anyone has questions, feel free to type it into the Q&A tab on the bottom of the screen. This is a series of webinars that NFS, Northeast Family Services, will be providing in the coming weeks. You'll be receiving emails on a webinar for school refusal. And then not too long after that, we will be doing a webinar on social isolation. So we're continuing the theme of working with kiddos in schools. So if you have a question, type it in. If there's a topic that you would like to hear more on, type that in too, and I can work with one of our clinicians. I'm sure we have an expert in that area that we can present on that subject matter for you. Kimberly makes herself available. If you have any questions, um, you know, contact me. You all have my email address, and I can get to Kimberly and get your questions answered.
And if you feel like, this presentation would be helpful for you or other your staff, at a school setting or just in general with other employees, let me know. I'd be more than willing to, do this again. Be available, make myself available to do the
Mhm.
presentation for you, at a staff meeting or for school.
Mhm.
If that could be helpful, I would love to be able to do that because again, I feel like it's very important to be aware and and understand, how to address these situations as they come up.
Yeah, you talked about staff. That's a whole different topic that we didn't talk about. Bullying in the workplace.
Just across
It's
the lifespan, it
it's
happens.
just not it's just not kids.
Military, a lot of different areas, there's a lot of bullying that can happen. It can, with colleges, you see all the, the frats and the sororities, like it can happen within those environments,
Yeah, the
work,
hazing. Yeah,
military can be very difficult. Like there's a lot of different, settings. Gym can be sometimes toxic depending on individuals. So there's a lot of different areas for adults. But again, we don't label it as bullying, but it still technically is.
sure is. All right. Kimberly, I don't see any more questions. So do you have some parting words?
Well, I just appreciate everybody taking the time to be here today for the presentation. And I just hope you take away just some of the information that I provided and just really take a look at it and say, how can I, if any, do anything different with what I'm currently doing with clients or at school or with my own children? And how do I identify that? Because again, it just takes one person to kind of make a difference in this world. So if we can help stop bullying and identify it and be aware of it at an earlier point, these children can maybe have the benefit of not being a bully and not being labeled that. And also our children not having, emotional damage from being bullied. So I think it's a win-win if we can kind of catch these things early and intervene as fast as possible.
Great, thank you. And this session was recorded. It will be posted on our website if you wanted to show others or watch it again. If you would like the slides, shoot me an email and I can PDF the slides and send them over to you. With that, thank you all very much for attending. Hope you got out of it what you were hoping to get and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.